Bart. It's so good to see you here again. It's so good to see you at any time. Well, this is the official bio. Bart has been the clergy leader for the Westchester Community for Ethical Culture since 1998 and was the executive director of the American Ethical Union, the National Federation of Ethical Culture and Ethical Humanist Societies, before retiring from that role last November. Bart is, in addition, a social worker who has worked with programs that help people recover from psychiatric disabilities. And as you heard, Bart is also a wonderful guitarist and singer. And I just want to thank you again, as I hope I have every time, for our National Leader Council gatherings where Bart would always bring his guitar and sing and bring us all together. And also, you may not know this, but Bart, like more than half of our current ethical culture clergy leaders, was also first a member of the Westchester Society, as I was a member here. Most of us were members in our congregations, and it was through the volunteer work that we did here that we grew to love ethical culture and wanted to make a contribution to not only our congregations, but to the greater movement. And that you have done, Bart, for which I greatly thank you.
I need to be a little higher, right? Okay. I'll put it like here. How about that? Does that sound reasonable? Yes? Thank you. In the back, I appreciate that. Let me first say I'm just so honored to be invited here for this final meeting in this historic place. It really is a moment in history for me, and I'm sure it must be deeply so for those of you that have been part of this community for such a long time. It was mentioned before that I was a member of the Westchester group before I became their clergy leader. Before I was a member, my wife was a member, and she's the one who actually introduced me to the society when we were first dating. And she says, I go to this place on Sundays, you can come too if you'd like. And it all changed from there. I also wanted to mention, back in the day when they were visiting leaders, they wore suits. This is not typical of me anymore, but I figured in this moment a suit would be a good idea. I also, when I went for my interview for become into the leadership training program at the American Ethical Union, I found a friend of mine had a lot of ideas about dressing for success, and so he and I went out and got a tie. And so I had that also today, just to kind of bring a little bit more of the history into the room here. So, but again, thank you for inviting me today. So for some time now, I've found myself struggling with motivation. I see myself as a generally positive person. Certainly, over the years, I've leaned much more towards the positive than I have towards the pessimistic, right? I'm an optimist by nature. In fact, my wife even noted that she thinks my brain is like bathed in serotonin, the neuro uptake device that you can get high without taking illicit substances. Anyway, even my sunny disposition, though, has been sorely pressed for quite some time. The COVID pandemic was a major blow, but even before that, the struggles were tough. It's been a tough time for quite a while now, hasn't it? And they've continued well past when the pandemic was such an ubiquitous presence in our lives. And I think it's frustration over the gap between what I'd like to see happen and what actually transpires that most challenges my cheerfulness. That, and along with the disappointment that comes with the reality of how limited my effectiveness is in actually making changes stick. Even so, I do carry on, and I don't give up so easily, or at least I don't give up entirely. The key to continued movement, I believe, is to find avenues for renewal at times when you feel depleted. And that's what I'd like to share with you today. So a case in point is a recent incident in my life that caused me pain. My most recent talk on feeding the hungry for my home ethical society, the Westchester Community for Ethical Culture, that talk had such great possibilities. There's a huge number of people in the county, Westchester County, which is where I live, that don't have the funds to pay for basic necessities of life, their housing, their health care, their food. And that number has been growing with the rollback of additional supports for those three areas that had been instituted during the COVID epidemic. More people are facing the eviction while losing their Medicaid coverage and still getting cuts in their food subsidies. It's a tough time out there for sure. So I intended to address the problem of hunger with my talk. And since hunger is a problem that literally reaches people on a gut level, and given that 40% or more of the food that's grown ends up in the garbage, I figured hunger is a problem that really could be practically solved if we had sufficient commitment and really put our minds to it. So I prepared a lot for that talk. I read up on various benefit systems, studied food distribution, learned about efforts to grow food locally and reduce waste. I volunteered with Feeding Westchester, a nonprofit organization that provides food to people in my county through food pantries. And with that, I was getting kind of lived experience with people in need and with people that were looking to address those needs. I co-hosted a dinner and a movie series that had the theme of sustainable sustenance, where we talked about different efforts to kind of address the food situation. I made a slideshow, and my presentation for this talk was just chock full of information about hunger and food distribution. My idea was that by laying out the current landscape related to food insecurity, I'd be able to map out pathways for relieving the hunger situation in Westchester County, where I live and work. But on the morning that I was rehearsing my talk for later in the day, I could see that I really did not have adequate solutions in mind. The gaps were too big, the available supports too small, and the supports that are available come with additional problems. I was unaware beforehand, for instance, that people who are undocumented aren't eligible for food stamps. That's a large population in Westchester County and certainly in New York City. So with all these problems kind of rolling around in my mind, the energy drained out of my talk, and I got stuck mid-sentence in front of my own people. So it's definitely not what I was hoping for. It's a terrible thing when you're a public speaker to have a loss for words, especially with something that you care about. I remember going back, there was a study that looked at what are the big fears that people have. And, you know, the really big ones are like loss of a spouse, loss of a child, you know, those sorts of things. But near the top was public speaking. And I think there's a reason for that, right? There's a sense of being on the line, especially with people that you know and care about, that makes speaking a rather tough event if it doesn't go well. I was especially embarrassed to have that happen when I have such strong feelings about the topic. And to do that in front of the community that supported me for decades, right? This is my 25th year right now as the clergy leader for that group. But despite the pain of the moment, I found ways to move forward, and we'll share some of those ideas right now. Okay, so this talk is really about energy for doing good, what you might call ethical energy. And that's certainly what Dr. Adler would have called it back in the day. So I'd like you to think about 4 questions that apply to this. Right? First question, what energizes you toward doing good things? Second, what helps you use energy for doing good effectively? Third, what may drain your energies and lessen your effectiveness? And lastly, what re-energizes you when you experience frustration or disappointment? So I'm going to walk through some of my answers to those 4 questions as they relate to food. I think it was the early 1970s when I was still in high school that I learned about the environmental costs of meat production. I've been a fan of the big 3 meat sources, beef, chicken, and pork. And while food was plentiful in my community, images of starving children in other parts of the world were haunting me. And I read somewhere that it took vastly more grain to feed cattle that were destined for slaughter than it took to nourish people with grain. It haunted me, too, to think of all those steers, pigs, and chickens being grown as food. So I started cutting back on meat and tried to eat more vegetables, even though I didn't like them. That didn't last long. And I quickly reverted to eating my old eating habits. And as an ethical culture leader, Mike French has said, the spirit is willing, but the flesh is delicious. So fast forward to the 1990s when I entered training to be an ethical culture leader. While I carried over the old guilt about eating animals, there was a significant change in my energy related to the issues I was preparing to become a clergy leader. I believe being a clergy leader meant I needed to be a bit more exemplary in my behavior and in my habits of living. Being good enough for myself was not as strong a motivator as being good enough for a congregation or good enough as a representative of ethical religion. So in answer to the first question, what energizes you to doing good things, was for me feeling responsible to others, caring about what others may think of me as a possibly exemplary person, even though I slipped on that. And I'm reminded of Jack Nicholson's compliment to Helen Hunt in As Good as It Gets. Anyone see that movie, As Good as It Gets? You may remember Jack Nicholson plays Melvin Udall, who is a very successful writer and a very unsuccessful human being who is suffering from, well, actually, he's making everybody else suffer around him, but he also has a profound obsessive-compulsive disorder. Anyway, he's having dinner with somebody that he's very attracted to and wants to impress, but is having a hard time dealing with his tendency to be nasty to people. And so he's called on it, and so he explains himself this way. Melvin says, I've got this, ailment? My doctor, a shrink that I used to go to all the time, he says that in 50 or 60% of the cases, a pill really helps. I hate pills. Very dangerous thing, pills. Hate. I'm using the word hate here about pills. Hate. My compliment is this. That night, when you came over and told me that you would never... All right, well, you were there. You know what you said. My compliment to you is, the next morning, I started taking the pills. Carol Connolly replies, I don't quite get how that's a compliment for me. Melvin says, you make me want to be a better man. That, for me, kind of captures the sense of my changing around my issues around food. And, actually, I started becoming vegetarian in, 1990s, maybe. And then, over time, I was just getting used to that and was exposed to a movie, Cowtopia. Anyone seen Cowtopia? And Cowtopia really chronicles the devastating impact of the dairy industry and the cattle industry on the environment. And so that led to me becoming vegan, which means no dairy products whatsoever, despite really loving cheese and a variety of other things that come from the dairy industry. So I've been kind of working at that for a while. Now, how do you make that work, though? Because quite honestly, there's no good way to live when it comes to food, is there? I mean, quite honestly, the plants are suffering now because I'm eating a lot more of them. The environment still suffers because the plants that I eat are often coming from far away. And there's so much food that's getting thrown away. How is my little vegan thing really making a big difference? And what I have kind of moved to kind of help with that is what I call harm reduction veganism. And by that I mean, I think it's worse for food to go to waste than for me to eat animals. So if there's a piece of beef or pork or chicken or fish or whatever that is destined to be tossed away, I'm going to eat it. I think it's just not right to let it go. It's bad enough that the animal gave its life for it, you know. And so similarly, I kind of look at how can I kind of gradually move toward a better place, right? And I think that's an important way to kind of conceptualize our overall sense of how do we move toward being better people, doing better things for the world that we live in. So, and again, you know, the importance of kind of doing that publicly is also there. Several years ago, my son, as a Father's Day present, gave me a license plate. And he said, you should have a license plate that says something about ethical culture. And so we looked and we found that the plate GOODWKRS was available, Good Works. And so my car now has a Good Works license plate on it. If you've ever driven around with a plate like that, you might notice that it's a little bit, makes you a little self-conscious. You know, I kind of appreciate renting at times because I can relax. But with the Good Works plate, I always feel like I got to explain myself. If I cut somebody else, I have to apologize, you know, all those sorts of things, right? So, you know, just be wary of what you do for yourself. Anyway, let's get to that second question. What helps you use energy for doing good effectively? Now, this is going to take a little setup. I've been following the work of Daniel Siegel. And it's familiar to folks here. He wrote the book Mindsight, and it's provided material for a number of talks over years. And actually, I learned about him through Joan Johnson Lewis, who is a leader here. So I imagine she may very well have talked about him here as well. Anyway, Siegel is a clinical professor of psychiatry at the UCLA School of Medicine, and is the founding co-director of the Mindful Awareness Research Center at UCLA. He views the mind as more than the brain and its thought processes. He sees the mind as an embodied process that regulates the flow of energy and information. All right, so for many of us, you know, we were probably thinking the brain is it, right? And that's where the mind is, and that's where it goes. But he encourages us to go a little bit broader than that. In his view, the brain is a vital component of the mind, but is only a component, not the entirety. And that's because the mind doesn't really exist in a vacuum. In fact, our minds are composed of elements that were outside the brain, and our minds are inextricably linked to our experience, without which we would not have words, language, concepts, ideas, ways to organize perceptions. Right? This is all borrowed material. You know, for a thought experiment, I thought, okay, let me see if I can figure out something that was that I made up that was unique to me. And I really wasn't able to do it because every time I found a word, I realized I learned that word from someplace else. And if I make up the word, well, really, what does that communicate, right? Anyway, so there's that. Anyway, so Siegel coined the term mindsight, which is also the title of the book. And he describes it as a process that allows the monitoring and modification of the flow of energy and information associated with our minds. All right? Monitoring and modifying the flow of energy. All right? So the idea here is by learning to observe the processes of our minds, we come to a richer understanding of ourselves, of others, and of how we're interrelated, right? And with the richer understanding comes the possibility of interacting with those very processes, right? And what Siegel says is you actually make anatomical changes in the brain when you do this work, right? We're talking about things that really stick with you. And this happens through our successful integration of the various aspects of our minds, right? So that's what enables us to function in an interconnected, coordinated, and well-balanced manner, which sounds great to me. So let's get back to that question. What helps you use energy for doing good effectively? So for Siegel's idea, he believes that improving our monitoring abilities, that is our capacity to kind of sense what's going on around us, within us, in between us, and perceiving the flow of energy that goes with that, that's what really makes it possible for us to get on top of our experience, right? To be able to do that without making a lot of judgments, like without criticizing, but just observing and taking it in and being able to kind of see it and become aware of it is just a really important capacity that people can develop. He's a big proponent of mindful meditation and ways to kind of go through your experience and look at how you're connecting with other people. And I think that's a really very helpful thing. Especially since if you are successful at really doing that, really looking at yourself as kind of an object of interest and of study, you also have a few more opportunities to kind of tweak what's going on a bit, right? And to make some changes. So again, the flow of energy is the important concept here, right? That mind is not like this static thing that is, just an accrual of words and ideas and things like that, but it's something that has energy and flow. And so the whole variety of perceptions, ideas, emotions are constantly coursing through our inner space. And Siegel likens this to kind of a stream. He calls it a river of consciousness that flows between two banks. And the one bank is rigidity on the one side, and on the other side is chaos, right? So basically, when you're kind of in the flow of things, right, and you're going about your daily business and things are going well, you feel that, right? You feel that sense of energy and you're moving along. Sometimes things happen, right? And they can happen in ways that kind of pull you up a bit short. And one thing that can happen if we're finding a struggle is we can get stuck, right? He would call that rigidity, where you just don't know what to do and you just wind up staying in place. Other times it may be that you're kind of getting more and more cranked up and you're just kind of going off the rails, right? And then you kind of maybe have a sense of energy but not a sense of directedness about it, and he would call that chaos, right? Where you just haven't organized what's going on enough for it to work. So for the most part, people kind of stay in between there, and it works out pretty well. But we do tend toward those two extremes from time to time, and that can really interrupt our efforts to do good things, right? For sure. So we need a flow of energy to pursue our ethical aims and to have an impact. So by monitoring that flow, that helps us navigate a little bit more effectively. So how do we know our minds are working effectively? Siegel's answer is the integration of our brain functioning, right? In an interconnected, integrated brain, many parts are working together as a coordinated and balanced whole, right? A whole that's flexible, adaptive, coherent, energized, and stable. And he uses the acronym FACES to help us remember those key characteristics, right? So the FACES: F, flexible; A, adaptive; C, coherent; E, energized; and S, stable. As a person with an integrated brain will be better at handling things themselves. Let me try that again. So one of the things that I realized over time is that working from an outline has its ups and downs, and so I actually have text up here. Working from a text has its ups and downs too, it turns out, especially when you're on the screen that's slipping around. Anyway, so as a person with an integrated brain will be better at handling themselves when things don't go their way, right? They're more able to work from an attitude of receptivity. Right? Remember that part about, kind of observing without judging? That's about receptivity. They're willing and able to decide how to respond to various situations and challenges, right? If you can pause and be aware of things, you're giving yourself time, You're giving yourself opportunity. Do I really need to do this the way I've done it before? Can we move in a different direction? And it gives us a chance to really respond a little bit more fully to the kind of situations that we are faced with. And Siegel calls that a yes brain mentality. Right? And that allows people to make better decisions, relate better to other people, understand themselves more fully. And a yes brain mentality can really shore up one's ethical energies, right? And how do you develop that? Well, through monitoring and modifying the process of our minds, right? So Siegel promotes the mindfulness meditation as a means of improving our capacity to monitor what's going on within us, right? And then when you develop the ability to perceive your thoughts and to perceive your feelings and your perceptions, when you're aware of them, when you can stand outside of them a little bit without making judgments, that is what helps you cultivate a sense of humility and an attitude of kindness toward yourself and others that will help you get away from getting stuck in place or going off the rails into chaos. Right? It kind of helps you stay in the center of that flow. And by keeping an eye on those 5 characteristics of, again, flexibility, adaptiveness, coherence, energy, and stability, we can more readily detect early warning signs, right? And alter course when we need to. Right? And that can also help us become more aware of the potential drains on our ethical energies, which then leads to that third question: what may drain your energies and lessen your effectiveness? So sometimes I think the very things that energize us also set the table for energy drains. Right? So in my case, the pressure I put on myself to be exemplary, for instance, in front of my community, added to the pain that I felt when I underperformed with my talk. Right? And likewise, on the food end of it, when you're trying hard to kind of work your diet, there's bound to be times when you just don't do as well as you'd really like to, right? The potato chips call out to you. The bacon really wasn't going to go bad, but damn, it's there. There's all these things that kind of get in there and get it mixed up, There's also, I'm finding the tide of culture has been a struggle for me these last several decades, really, to be honest. Back when I first became part of the Ethical Society in White Plains, and that was 1985 I first started attending, so it's been a little while, it was a different world in the society, right? There were, first of all, a lot more people. There were working committees that were doing lots of interesting things. We had this parade of visiting leaders come through that brought some new ideas and also gave us the sense that we are part of an interesting and broader whole of ethical societies, so that was all pretty cool. And I find these days those elements are much harder to sustain. Right? We went through quite a long period of committees of one. One committee of one, you had like 5 or 8 people that were working away, and over the course of time, one after the other kind of moves on or does something else or dies or who knows exactly what, and then you're left with the one person who had the passion for it in the first place, and then they're stuck with it. That's how we wound up with a treasurer for 23 straight years. So it's that kind of thing that can happen. And part of it is, when you're used to having a community of people and being able to share the joys, when that shrinks, that can become a tough thing to deal with, right? And I can imagine that's kind of been a bit in play in the community here as well, right? That it's harder, when there's something that you really love that doesn't have the kind of popularity for new people that you would like to see, and certainly that you would hope to see, and then to kind of carry that along, that can kind of sap the energies a little bit, no? What I've been finding in Westchester has been helpful is Ironically, Zoom helped us have more frequent meetings and get more people to those meetings. Oddly enough, it's one of those things. I have a love-hate relationship with Zoom. Sorry, all you folks out there, but on the upside, it really makes it easy for you to kind of call a meeting and people to show up and to go through stuff. And the fact that you can mute people actually can be a very effective tool for having a well-organized time together, right? And to get some real work done. And on the other end, it's emotionally flat. And I find it's very difficult to feel nourished on a Zoom meeting. And so what I've been finding helpful is to keep looking for places where there are opportunities for us to be in the same room together. That's one reason I'm very happy to be here today with you all here. And if I wasn't here, I'd be at Westchester in small group gatherings with people there as well. And that has resuscitated a good chunk of energy for me personally, and I think is something that really can be so helpful for us. The other thing that has been working has been to kind of spread that out into other areas too, because the other thing that seemed to happen was the coalitions that we had also kind of fell to the wayside, right? Because they were kind of based around being able to get together and meet and march and do other kind of things. And to build that back up has not been as easy as I'd like to think. Recently, though, my wife and I joined a chorus, and it's a local group, and so suddenly we're with these people that mostly live in the same town of us that we'd never seen before. And we don't live in a very big town, so it's kind of strange in that regard. And these are people that we really seem to have a fair amount in common with. And so it's been a refreshing thing to know that you can move into a new thing and meet different people, and that we can do things together and enjoy it. So last night was my first ever karaoke experience. We had an after party after our chorus had finished its season, and so I got a chance to belt it out in a bar someplace. Anyway, but the thing is, it brings with it a sense of hopefulness about how we can keep getting connected to the world around us. The other important piece is that volunteer work that I was mentioned earlier with Feeding Westchester. Now my wife and I, once a week, there's a mobile pantry that comes to Ossining. And so we work with the pantry. And so that gives us a good chance to connect with these volunteers that are finding ways to get food to people that really need it. And to connect with the people who really need food that are there happily getting things that will really help sustain them through the week. There is a very good feeling that comes with having a sense of agency around being helpful to people in their lives. And that's something that we can build on, isn't it? And that's something that I hope will be things that you build on here with this community as well. So I'd like to end with just a refreshing of those questions for you, things that I hope you'll carry with you when you kind of look to kind of massage your own ethical energy. Right? What energizes you toward doing good things? What helps you use your energy for doing good effectively? What may drain your energies and lessen your effectiveness? And what re-energizes you when you experience frustration and disappointment? Again, I so thank you for being here today and for having this opportunity to speak.